Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn on the power of sensitivity readers and cultural consultants as part of our Ethical Set series. I'm Megan Ross, Seed&Spark's head of creator success. Before we begin, we'd first like to acknowledge the land we are all on is occupied territory. Please check the YouTube Live comments feed for a link to a First Nations COVID relief fund and an amazing app that will tell you exactly whose land you are currently watching from, or in the video description if you're watching this as a VOD. I am coming to you from the land originally belonging to Jamanos, Tonkawa, Coahuiltecan, and Comanche. And if you're not familiar with Seed&Spark, we are a platform built to support creators by providing tools for wherever you are in your journey, from crowdfunding and education to impact distribution. Before we get into today's event, we have a few wonderful partners to thank today, and Danny will share their links in the chat. In the Cut LA produces multiple online events per month, carefully curated to bring value to budding Black creatives and other marginalized communities. They've created a space where you can learn from real industry professionals and receive actionable, thoughtful advice on how to advance your career. Film Shop is a nonprofit collective of independent filmmakers committed to developing new work through peer support and collaboration. Chapters in Brooklyn, Manhattan, Los Angeles, and New Orleans meet weekly to workshop projects, offer constructive critique, and incubate new ideas. The School of Film and TV at Loyola Marymount University is one of the top 10 film schools in the country. Located in LA, the heart of the media and entertainment industry, SFTV is known for its robust hands-on training, exceptional liberal arts education, and highly engaged community. And finally, the Gotham provides various levels of membership to creators in the film and media industry, from filmmakers, screenwriters, podcasters, and more, with the goal of providing tangible connections, learnings, and skills to apply to their projects and careers. And now I'll introduce our amazing guests for today's event. Marcela Davison Avilés is a prominent American essayist, independent producer, attorney, and Latino cultural dramaturge and advisor. She's a contributing writer for the Journal of Alta California, the Mercury News, and a book reviewer for National Public Radio. Avilés currently serves as lead cultural consultant for Disney Pixar's Coco. She's a partner and managing director of Tomcat Films LLC with Kat Taylor, and founder and executive producer at the Chapultepec Group LLC, developing several original projects for film, TV, and the concert hall. In addition to her work on Coco, her filmography includes 54 credited TV episodes and specials. Please welcome Marcela. Alex Creswick is a former VP of Production and Development who shifted their focus to sensitivity reading, diversity editing, and consulting for film and TV in 2018. Using a story-first development approach, she works closely with writers to make sure their authorial intent is accurately and authentically reflected in all aspects of character and story, often with the helpful use of internet memes. In addition to their work with developing projects, Alex is also a physical producer and intimacy coordinator. Please welcome Alex. And finally, Stacey Parshall Jensen is a mixed-blood Indigenous and Black novelist, screenwriter, award-winning filmmaker, and a sensitivity reader, diversity editor, and cultural consultant based in Minneapolis and LA. She is co-owner of Through the Wilderness LLC, a film production company dedicated to untold stories. Blessed is her award-winning Native female action short about a mother being a warrior. She is currently working with Brickhouse Talent agency, creating the curriculum for their Cultural and Inclusivity Coordinator program. She holds an MLS in Interdisciplinary Child Social Policy from the U of MN, an MFA in Creative Writing from Hamline University, and an MFA in Screenwriting from USC School of Cinematic Arts. Please welcome Stacey. Thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited to talk to you. I think there's a lot of people who genuinely don't know your job exists, and they're probably the people who need you the most, to be honest. So let's start there. How would you each describe your work and your areas of focus as a sensitivity reader, cultural consultant, to someone who doesn't know what your role does? And we'll start with Marcela.
Well, thank you, first of all, for including me in this conversation. And I guess the way I would describe what I do is I'm one part culture whisperer, one part elucidator of culture, zeitgeist, language, for storytellers who are interested to tell stories about Latino, Latina, Latinx / Hispanic communities, people, regions, and whether they're from those communities, but most especially folks who are not,
Hmm.
oftentimes seek my help in
Hmm.
understanding a way into culture that they're not familiar with so that their storytelling can be authentic,
Hmm.
respectful, and sensitive to their intended audience.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a key piece, that sometimes there are people who are not from those cultures who are telling the stories of their other people's cultures, and how do you do that in a respectful manner? And that's where a sensitivity reader comes in. We'll go in clockwise direction. Alex, how would you describe your work to someone?
So I kind of meet at the center of storytelling, education, intent, and impact. And my biggest goal is to make sure that writers' intent and their impact are
Hmm.
matching by either I try and just like very much ground it in the story because I enjoy talking to people about these issues within the framework of a story because it gives us a very concrete sort of structure to deal with some of those internalized biases and to have conversations in a very grounded medium. And like,
Hmm.
I fully believe that writers don't intend to cause harm or mess up, but we're all human and we can't know everything. And so I'm really here to be an extra resource from a point of view that is probably not usually reflected.
Hmm.
And for me personally, because I moved the world as a white woman, it is to try and get not only my voice, but the voices of the people you should be listening to and focusing on in your storytelling to put them in front of you in a way that's like digestible to say,
Hmm.
here's an article you should read because you're talking about this topic and this person has the
Hmm.
point of view that you want to espouse.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that it's not you're not going into it thinking that people are malintended. I use this phrase so often: good intentions, bad execution, because I feel like I come across people with like, it's like, oh, it's in their heart, but it's like the actions just don't match.
Yeah, my
Um,
memification of that is I am not Gandalf and you are not the Balrog. Like, I'm not sitting here going, you shall not pass. It's more like, ooh, join me on this very interesting adventure down the river.
I love that. Stacey, how would you describe your work? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
Do that. Okay. Hi. First of all, thank you again for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I think when I talk to people about being a sensitivity reader, and but I also do diversity editing and cultural consulting, that those three things are very different. Most of my work is actually in sensitivity reads. Um, what I tell them is that my job is to read whatever the written work is, or sometimes it's a podcast or a statement or something. I've worked on those before. And my goal is just to help them see hidden or unconscious biases,
Hmm.
or any stereotype that needs to be addressed. And I make sure I add that needs to be addressed, because my goal isn't for like everyone to like not ever write anything that's like a stereotype. It's like, no, the character who is that particular race or that particular gender or lives in that region or whatever, at first glance you could make it a stereotype, but the goal of for me as a storyteller is to um, help the writers just be better writers, where
Hmm.
they take the time and they create a backstory that is, you know um, that lends to them being, three-dimensional characters. So a lot like what Alex said, my work always goes back to the story, and I totally agree that when I can talk about the story and say, about this character, would they or would they not do this, or why or something, that it's generally just easier,
Hmm.
uh, I feel like I feel like this is work that I've done for my own writing, and I was doing that before I started having people ask me,
Hmm.
if I wouldn't mind. So I actually just began to have my own company, like beginning in 2020. You know,
Oh, nice.
yeah. So but since then I've seen this is huge surge, and I'm always really grateful, really, to the writers who come to me, whether it's the writer or literary agencies or TV shows or studios or something, because they're like usually tiptoeing in like, okay, we don't know exactly what we're doing and we're so grateful we need you, or I have a feeling this isn't right. Can you check this
Mhm.
out? And so when we come from that place, then we're working together,
Yeah.
to tell an authentic and respectful story. And then lastly, the area of focus that I usually end up being asked to read for has to do with indigenous themes or people. I'm Manda and Hidatsa from the MHA Nation in North Dakota, and then I'm part Black. So it's usually those two cultures that people like come to me for first. But I also read for addiction and poverty, and there's a wide range of other things that I read for also. So that's me.
Yeah, there's this demand right now for all of these diverse stories, but I'm so grateful your jobs exist, because if we had the current leaders of the industry being the only ones telling those stories and not including the people who actually have those lived experiences, then we would be seeing these one-dimensional characters, like you said, these tropes, these stereotypes over and over again. And the intent would end up becoming even if the intent was good, the outcome would be bad.
Right.
So when should someone consider hiring a sensitivity reader or cultural consultant? Does it come as early as concepting? Is it once they have like a polished draft? At what stage do you normally recommend someone seek out your services? And we can start again with Marcela.
Well, I think as early as possible. I think at the very inception. I mean, I like my colleagues here, I've worked on lots of different types of projects, and I found that success is the probability for success in terms of the goals that one has in bringing on somebody like me are achieved if it's done early, because if it's then you can anticipate, especially if your production team or a publishing house or whoever is not familiar with the community, then it can be very difficult to undo or unwind, innocent mistakes or well-meaning mistakes, or things that would occur in terms of the storytelling, especially if you're on a high-budget project where it costs money to redo things or undo things or pivot. So I think that, and the other suggestion that I will make is that, especially in a film and TV or in other types of broadcast media, that oftentimes what might occur is that because of the nature of the project, changes are going to be suggested by your sensitivity reader or by your cultural consultant, that sometimes there's a line that gets crossed and you're outside of consulting and now you're in creative.
Yeah.
Because it's your creative that is going into this project. And so some folks may, and the reason for that is because, for example, translation, translation of Spanish or Spanish into English, English into Spanish, or indigenous language, oftentimes the translator is, their translation is creativity itself in order to get at meaning of the original text. So folks may want to think ahead, not only to bring somebody on early, but in what role. And to be sure, just to come on as a cultural consultant or as a sensitivity reader, there are very clear guardrails for how that works. But oftentimes, and I've been on projects where it's just been cultural consulting, and I've been on projects where it's been a combination of cultural consulting and producing, and, in the role of creative producer. And so, there's no set way of doing things, but I think it's helpful for folks who are the filmmakers or the editors or that are calling the shots in that way to understand that there may be opportunities there, but it's also something to think about. But to answer your question, my experience has been the earlier, the better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny because we keep getting that answer with all the other industries we talk about that intersect with entertainment. So we had one about sustainable sets, and I asked like, how early do you bring someone on? And they were like, as early as possible.
Yeah.
You know, even like in casting, like making sure you're using digital scripts over printing. And so I think that's important, like for sensitivity readers and cultural consultants, to not be an afterthought and not be a, oh wait, no one at this table is up from that culture, let's call someone in before we go to set or during the edit. Like that's too late. Alex, do you have anything to add about, you know, when someone should bring a sensitivity reader or cultural consultant on?
Yeah, I think it's a begin as you mean to proceed kind of a situation, because the way that you conceptualize characters and the role that they're going to play in your world and how they're going to enact your point of view is pretty fundamental to the storytelling. I'm mostly, almost exclusively working in film and television, so I would say that TV would require you more than film to have that person at the beginning, because TV is so much more about the engine and how the story is going to progress, and you have to look much longer term than a film, which ostensibly is just, you know, 2 hours, maybe 3 if you're very lucky, of a fairly contained story. So you can get away with a little bit more flexibility what you can do in film, because you're just doing that one story, whereas TV, I mean, I don't think you want to have to try and retroactively fit an entire season's worth of potentially like damaging story and figure out how to retrofit that going forward. So you can kind of get away with a little bit in film, but still like your approach and just the very like people that you're going to see and the roles they fill, you should be thinking about that very intentionally from the beginning.
Yeah, that makes me think of like the examples we saw that were called out in TV last summer during like the racial justice protests, and it was like, hey, Missy from Big Mouth maybe shouldn't be voiced by a white woman, and like seeing everyone kind of recognize and then address them, but it's like that some of this work should be done, like you said, as soon as you're concepting these characters before you even flesh out the full season 1.
I mean, one of my big things that I almost always do is go, okay, how many disabled characters do we have in here? And the answer is always none.
Yeah.
But that's the first thing, like the first energy that I'll bring before really anything else is, how does disability fit into your world? Because the majority of creators just don't consider it at all. And that you're saying something. By not saying something, or the people that you don't talk about or put in your story, you're saying something as clear and eloquent as the people that you do put in there.
Right.
So.
Yeah. That's a good plug for our Lunch and Learn next month, which is all about accurate disability representation on and off screen. But like you said, not excluding those stories says a lot about your project, even if it, you know, you don't think that it's relevant. Stacey, would you add anything else about like when you bring on someone like you into their work?
Well, I totally agree with Marcela and Alex that the sooner the better. You know, some of the clients I've worked with that are more just cultural consulting, we have done that, you know, but it's also, I very rarely hear from somebody on their own. It's usually somebody that I've worked with before, or they have a very strong recommendation where they know from somebody else what I have done with their written work later. And then they'll come to me and ask for that. I worked on a TV show last year, and they were kind of in that place of like, okay, whoa, we're supposed to start shooting, or not shooting. We're supposed to shoot at a certain time, and we've actually have auditions next week, and now this is just coming up, you know. So how quickly can you turn this around, and whatever, you know, and I was able to do that work for them, of course. But that quick turnaround just, I think, adds this other type of chaos, you know, because they were like, you know, well, can you just tell us, is this okay? And it's like, well, I'm not Pawnee, so I can't tell you that. However, I can do the research and I can get you connected. I can do these things, but it doesn't work that way. It's not like, just that instant that it can turn around that fast. And so to avoid that kind of panic, I think starting from the very beginning, like you said, when it's just, it's concept. I work with a gaming company, and what I found with them, because the games, they're doing adaptations of old games, that there's a lot of things that they still have to keep in place. So some of the things that, I pointed out, and I always give a suggested fix and provide, some education, or, explain why. Some of the things they weren't able to go back and change because it was already like done, so it's like, unfortunately, we can't change that, but we could change this. So can we talk about what we could do with this? So that doesn't seem as bad, I mean, so it's difficult to me. Everybody kind of felt that disappointment, where it's just like, oh, we can't do everything, but knowing there's a good chance that they could still get some, some feedback, some flack for the first part.
Yeah, that's like watching old shows and films and being like, who that does not hold up today? Like, this is like, there's definitely not even a consideration of like that person's culture, or it's pretty shocking. But it is nice to see shows and films that you can tell like they did do the research. It feels real. Like Reservation Dogs is one that I like watching it. I'm like, this is not a trope. This is I worked for a network years ago. It was like a bunch of white people trying to do a show about Native people, and I was like, no. And so seeing a show do it right is really, you can tell like they hired the right people to tell that story. So
I think a great counterpoint also to Reservation Dogs is The Boys, which is a show that is very, very aware of what it's doing, but at no point does it step out of what it's doing to actually make commentary on the tropes that it's showing you. So all it does is recycle and reiterate those tropes and kind of go, we did it cool. But they don't actually like ground it in anything new. They're not changing your point of view. They're not like addressing what those tropes mean and deconstructing them. So what you end up with is like a very pretty show that ultimately is very shallow. Whereas Reservation Dogs, like, I love looking up all of the time. Like, there's a whole blog that takes you through the references and the things you've missed. It's so fun to immerse yourself in it. Whereas The Boys, I'm kind of like, okay, that was my dose of violence for the week. I'm gonna go and like watch Schitt's Creek now.
Oh yeah, yes.
That's an interesting call out. It's like that, shows are being smarter, but if you're not like having that critique of that trope and just presenting it as a trope, like you're not really finishing the work that you're
just redoing the trope. Like
exactly.
And what's the value of that? Is the real question there. Like, what are you saying? You're just saying, hey, here's a trope. And all right.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah. So more recently, I mean, especially as people are now being, more demanding and accountable to industry leaders for the racism, the sexism, the, transphobia, the homophobia, everything we've seen on TV and film that hasn't been respectful of the communities that they're portraying. Would you say, like, what are the shifts you've seen in your work? I would say even over the last like current pandemic, as people are demanding this accountability, how are you working with your clients? How are they being more proactive about the work that you do? I'll start with Marcela.
Well, I think the one thing I might do is just to point out, because it's interesting that folks, we take digital media, technology, the internet, the zeitgeist of the internet and social media for granted. But, I think the pivot, like the big pivot in terms of marginalized communities or communities who have been oppressed, whose voices haven't been heard, in storytelling, in storytelling by the mainstream community, that it occurred when social media, became part of our daily civic culture, such that something happens, somebody goofs, and make say, and in the case of Coco, there was a filing, trademark filing, to trademark the phrase Dia de Muertos, or Day of the Dead. And when that occurred, the zeitgeist blew up and started a journey for the filmmakers and those of us who came on board that was very different from what had been previously anticipated. So from the ability of folks whose voices had previously been unheard to now be heard, number one, and then number two, the capacity to move the needle in ways that impact the business of storytelling. So if your social justice advocacy relative to storytelling is gaining traction, that moves somebody's stock price. So that causes, when people realized that, so sort of, touch point number two. And then during it caused folks to kind of say, ooh, we not only is this the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do from the standpoint of double bottom line. And then during the pandemic, my experience has been that there's been another sort of upsurge in folks calling me, or in people becoming more interested in storytelling to uplift or illuminate unheard voices. And I think that is just a very human reaction to what we've all been through, which is, a once in a lifetime or once in several lifetimes event in which communities have to come together in order to survive, just in order to survive. And how can we do that? How can we find our, come together, find common ground, find our common humanity, connect with one another as human beings on this planet, but through stories that we share, that we find in common. In the pandemic, sort of as nature or the earth or health imposed itself on us without saying, I'm only going to hit you and not you. To be sure, communities, there was disparity with respect to communities, the pandemic on communities and marginalized communities, to be sure. But my experience was that because everyone was in this experience together, and that we were finding that the pandemic was impacting globally, that folks naturally were beginning to think, we need to come together as people on this planet, and we need to start sharing our stories. We need to understand one another better in order to help one another, and also in order, even in terms of public health strategy and policies. Some folks believe one thing, other folks believe another thing. Very, on opposite sides of the policy of whether it's masks or vaccines or what have you. And turning to the craft of storytelling in order to elucidate what's the best way for us to heal, and so for me, that yearning really created a catalyst for folks to understand the agency of storytelling, but the efficacy of storytelling, and the need for storytellers whose voices have not been heard to be heard, and to be lifted up in the right way, with respect, with authenticity, with sensitivity, and so I would say, I would just offer those sort of three examples of the onset of social media, the understanding of how social media impacts sort of the business of storytelling, and then the impact of the pandemic.
That's I feel like so introspective about that now, because like at Seed&Spark especially, we think stories have such an impact on and have real world repercussions. And I always think about, I heard when, like, this is during the Obama administration, but like Michelle Obama got on a call with a bunch of showrunners and talk to them about like how their work does influence the way people perceive each other and understand each other. And, you know, like a small example is like a show like Will and Grace, and like, you know, the first gay couple on TV, and how that you can see the line to, you know, the Marriage Equality Act from that event. And so it's like, it's not just TV and film. It's not just like entertainment for us. It's really has real world impact to our everyday lives. Alex, what would you add to that? How the shift you've seen in the last year or so?
It's been really interesting because I worked as a VP of development for film financiers production companies. So I've been on the side where I was, you know, hired by bosses and also told what projects to work on, not necessarily by my own choosing and not necessarily by the creative teams that I would have chosen to work with. So I've had to like try and fit myself in very hostile environments where I'm sitting here like, hey, y'all, just because we can make something does not mean that we should. That is something that we struggle with, and like my clients struggle with all the time. So when I transitioned more into this role, which is, it's an incoming business. It's very hard for this job to be an outgoing business because part of it is it's so tailored, and sometimes it's not, like weirdly not tailored. Like there's certain things that I can do as a VP with like 10 years of experience with a script that other people couldn't. You really have to build up a measure of trust. And the question is like always going to be how much that person trusts you, trusts your kind of what you're saying, and then trusts sort of how you guide them down that path. And so the incoming business I prefer vastly because those are people who are already primed to do this. And the fact that we're having those conversations in general, the fact that there's anybody out there who's like, hey, I think that I might need this, is a huge change even over 10 years. The thing that like is very interesting to me is because I have many clients who I tend to work with them over the course of either one project. I'm on one client who are on third round of notes, which for a feature is pretty standard. And then I have clients who keep coming back to me year after year. And then I have clients who we've segued into, we no longer talk about story. They just like, I have one who called me up and was like, okay, I need to talk to you about homelessness. I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell you right now that the solution is to just give them homes. We'll start the conversation from there. So
can you come down to Austin, because we've, you know, there's a group of people trying to criminalize homelessness. And
they're about to do a sweep of MacArthur Park, y'all. They're about to clear out everybody out of MacArthur Park and pull an Echo Park. And like, I'm part of a group that feeds MacArthur Park every Sunday and has been for over a year. Like, it's going to be crushing and tragic. But like, those are the relationships that I've built like over the time. So I've watched people like change. I've watched their writing change. I've just watched even the way that they talk about these things. Part of that is I've kind of tried to teach them that it's okay to say that you don't know something and to acknowledge that you don't know it. And also we get to a point where I'm like, I need you to step in a space where it's okay for you to go, hey, this is not my story to tell. A lot of my clients are white people. And that is a huge conversation. Like one of my clients is very mad at me right now. But one of my clients is like legitimately very angry at me because I got a project and went, this is not your story to tell, but I can't tell you that right off. So we worked on it a very long time. And then they just turned around and asked me the question. And I was like, oh, where did this come from? Nothing that we've done led me to think that you were having these thoughts. But it goes back to, I can't remember who said it, but like, they just wanted to tell you, like, tell me this is okay. Tell me that we have checked enough boxes that this is okay. And I was like, I can't do that.
Right.
And so she was just staring at me and she kept trying to change the direction she was coming at. And I was like, you know, in your heart of hearts that this is not a story you should be telling.
Wow.
I can't, I mean, I would sit here and take your anger because I understand where it's coming from, because that anger hides fear. And that is ultimately hiding the fear of acknowledging that, oh no, I did harm. Like I did, like this stuff does actually put out harm into the world, and coming to terms with that within ourselves is so hard. And doing it in the context of something you've created is even harder because you love that thing so much. And it's so hard to give up your power and replace that context with and put someone else's context as more important than your own. But man, is that like a supreme act of allyship, y'all. So like I've just seen all of those things kind of happening on a small scale. But the thing you have to remember is this is a business built on small scales. Like the majority of our businesses are 5 people or less. It's like one principal, a couple of execs supporting them, and then a couple of assistants. So even small scale change actually has the potential to have very big change. We're just at this point, we're kind of spreading through the world. And like a large part of what I do is just educate people on how to work with sensitivity readers and diversity editors. Like, don't be scared of us. Again, I'm not Gandalf. You're not the Balrog. We are here to like help you. Like, we want to take this journey with you. And like everyone I've ever talked to is just like, yeah, you know, when you talk to a writer and you get to the end of that conversation, they're like, I need to go because I need to write. I'm like, good, go write. I'm like so excited for you to continue on this journey and write for you. So that's my very rambly answer.
No, that's amazing. Humility over ego. I've been in that position before, and I'm like, do I have the authority to tell this person? Like, I'm Arab. I watched a white guy pitch a story about a comedy about an Arab actor who decides to make a fake terrorist cell because people keep thinking he's a terrorist in casting calls. And I was like, that's not your story to tell. Like that one, you're appropriating, you're pushing through another trope. And you had like, he didn't have anyone. I was like, oh, is your writing partner Muslim or Arab? And it's like, no, he just studied Middle Eastern studies in college. Like I just couldn't. And that was a few years ago. And I didn't know like if I could say anything back then, because I thought everyone's around me is laughing and like I'm the token uncomfortable person. But I think like just telling people gently, like you said, like this isn't your story to tell. Like as much as you love it, it's just not. But yeah, thank you for that, Stacey. What are the changes you've seen more recently in your work and how people are approaching you?
I think the biggest change is how many clients. Like there's been such an increase of people, you know, reaching out to me, asking for me to read and stuff. When I began this work, when I officially began this work, I took the time to send out like a bit of a query letter about who I was and what I was offering. And I used the, I'm forgetting the name of it, the Writers Publishers, like this massive book that has all these literary agencies and listed in there. And I went through and contacted, like, you know, via email and just sent this information out, you know, and I got a lot of people writing back saying, oh, this is great. You know, we'll keep you in mind. And then some are like, we've been looking for this and how can we get you on our team? And then there were a couple that were just like, this is not for me. But I mean, no, like, dear Stacey, or, you know, best of luck at the end. It just said, this is not for me. And it was like, well, okay, you know, this person's working through something where, you know, you can go and do that. That's not what I want to do. I don't want to take the time to try to whatever, you know, so, so I've seen a lot of people and who are, you know, reaching out for this. So I know that there are people out there who want to do better, you know, and it's like, okay, you know, this is uncomfortable, you know, it is. So like you said, you know, being the token uncomfortable person in the room, it's like, you know, that's a bunch of crap. Like, I don't want to be that person anymore. So, and the only way we're going to get past that is if like, we all have to deal with a little bit of what makes us uncomfortable, you know, with our own biases. And that's why I always like really emphasize that it's hidden or unconscious. Even though there's some cases where I'm like, I think you know exactly what you're doing here, and you want me to give you that stamp of approval, and it's like I'm not going to do that. You know, I had one client who wrote this huge book, this huge novel, and it was really outrageous. Like parts of it, the racism and these erotic scenes that he wrote about Black women was just. Oh, it was beyond cringeworthy. I mean, I was actually really upset, like to a point where I had to put it down and be like, okay, how can I take care of myself to continue to do this job? You know, and then I had this fear where it's just like, he may not pay me, you know, once he gets this report. But it was like, you came to me, so this is what I'm going to tell you. You know, and so there were, you know, I explained a lot of things, and I always like cut and paste off a document and put it in a different report. That way they can see exactly what page I'm at and what the context is and so on. And I, it was a huge report that I ended up sending to him, and he wrote back that he didn't quite understand some things, and so I had to get to that, like, you know, you can't, you know, you're not the person to tell the story. It's just like, you know, this is beyond offensive, and this is why, you know, and he paid me. and then I don't know what he's doing with it now, and I'm always open to additional comments and feedback. I include that in my rate, so when I send out my contract to people with new clients, it does say right on there that this includes, comments and feedback, and then if it's about me actually reading something more or developing something, then that's a different job. But but I have had people where they're like, oh, so tell me again why I can't use the N word. And it's like,
oh my God.
Okay.
How is this still a
Once more with feeling, y'all. Let's go. Let's settle up.
Yeah, I'm just like, all right, so, but yeah, there's just more people though. And that's, it's a bittersweet kind of thing where I'm happy that there's more people, and I'm really happy to be a part of this community of cultural consultants and sensitivity readers and diversity editors and so on, that we're all working towards, telling better stories that are respectful, and authentic, and then at the same time, to be honest, I still have like this righteous rage that is just brewing that says, this is also really that it's 2021 and we're finally doing this, and there's been all of these people prior to me that got away with, like, the white execs in the room going, ha ha ha, that's a funny joke about black people, and where I'm just like, okay, funnel the rage, and use it for good, so yeah, things are changing. Things are definitely changing.
That's advice.
I was going to key off of what Stacey is saying, because I think it's so essential what she's sharing, and Alex as well, that what I'm finding is that that the request for this type of assistance oftentimes comes from the filmmakers themselves. I rarely get calls from high-level studio execs or even development execs. And where the culture clash within the project happens is because the filmmakers, in my experience, oftentimes have affinity or sensitive. They're sensitive. There's always that, it's my story and I'm going to tell it the way I want to tell it, issue that you're going to face. But then when you have to then, have a conversation with folks that are on this big team or this big committee of how this film is going to be or how this TV show is going to be, then it's a whole other battle. It's like you're fighting the battle again, with the studio execs. And so part of my hope, hearing what Stacey's just sharing, is that somehow the sensitivity readers or the cultural consultants, that function, that contribution to contemporary storytelling can also reside in the exec suite, right? Because if you don't have awareness there, no matter how much awareness you have on set or, in development or, ultimately it seems to me that in many times I have found that there's always this human desire to want to control the creative, no matter who is working on the project, whether it's from within the, the C-suite or for sure with the filmmakers. And unless there can be that awareness that's all the way up in other words, it's really important that the leadership over here gets it, because you're not going to be able to do the right thing, so to speak, by a story unless somebody has your back, that's calling the shots. And that's another aspect of where I hope this part of our profession goes, so that its presence is itself understood, kind of along the way, whether it's in the legal department, with business affairs, with the studio execs, as well as with the filmmakers.
It's
Yeah.
interesting that you mentioned the legal department because I'm working now as an intimacy coordinator. I just finished my training recently. We had a big conversation about the language in writers for actors, because for people with breasts, you have to specify whether or not you show nipple, but people without breasts, it is depending on the show, depending on the network. And like for people who are non-binary or who, you know, approach their bodies differently than just that binary, that language, it matters, like even though 5 people are going to see that. So it's at every single level, and having the support of your C-suite, it makes it so much easier, because if somebody's, you know, it's much easier to present a united front. If one person's being resistant, to be like, well, we're all on board. So like, let's have a conversation about what you're finding stressful about this whole situation. I'm here for you.
Yeah. Everyone needs to go to therapy, and everyone needs to be having these conversations with themselves and the people that they work with. But yeah, that like those decision makers, because sometimes I'll see stuff and then I'm like, how did this get through so many people?
Right.
And those executives are the ones signing off on all of that. So it's, you know, if they're not clued in on like why this isn't okay, or why you need to bring a sensitivity reader, a cultural consultant on day one of the project, then it's like a lost cause at that point, and it feels like you're just, you know, climbing an uphill battle. We have a couple questions from the audience that I wanted to pull up, and one of them actually is related to another question we had. So we'll pull up PJ Perez's question for anyone on the panel to answer. What do you recommend for a writer developing a script on spec who wouldn't have resources to hire a cultural consultant, but wants a specific community's input? And this is related. We wanted you to address, like, for our emerging filmmakers, the indie filmmakers in our community who might not, you know, have those big budgets like the production companies and studios have. Like, what can they do to still do right by that work? Anyone can answer.
Well, I think that there are different ways to achieve that goal, given those circumstances. But I would say at the outset, if there's a way to compensate, you know, you always want to compensate folks, and there's different ways to do that. If you don't have the budget on hand, there's perhaps you include them in a back end or whatever, you know, in terms of the deal of the project. Another way to do it is to be very transparent, of course, and to reach out to communities through their not-for-profit representatives. And by that, I mean there's nonprofit community organizations who, because they're nonprofit, because they have a community-based mission, you might be able to approach leadership there and seek guidance. But again, the challenge is because they're nonprofit, you know, they're going to want to, likely that, you know, if it's an arts nonprofit, for example, their administrators will want their staff to be paid, but there might be a grant opportunity for you to apply to in order to get support, in order to bring on that capacity. And so I think it would be, you know, sort of 2 suggestions, trying to be practical, which is sit down with folks within the community to determine if there's a way to achieve compensation, whether it's by applying for grants or in some other way, such as including them in your project as partners, so that if there's monetization down the line, there might be an upside for them. That's just a couple of ideas.
Also, the internet is out there, and every single group finds a place on the internet to have conversations with each other that are semi-public, that you can access. TikTok, there's like TikTok eddies that you can get stuck in, and treat it like the gift that it is. These are communities who are having these conversations specifically so you can come in and watch them. You can see who's talking to one another. You can see the conversations that they're having, not necessarily your place to have any input in those conversations.
Right.
But every single community has activists, has writers, have people who are talking about themselves in the world, how the world fits in with them,
Mm-hmm.
how it works, and you are blessed with access, and you can immerse yourself in those communities, be very specific about who you're looking at, be very specific about what they're saying, look at the critiques from other members of the community about what everyone is saying. And my sort of rule of thumb, as it were, is, can you laugh at the community jokes? Do you inherently, when you see a joke within the community, do you inherently understand it? Because like when you started talking about that dude who was doing a comedy, specifically a comedy about being Arab and he's not Arab, like that is bold, because comedy is purely contextual. We only laugh at things when we have a shared context and we know what we're laughing at. Laughter is a corrective form in all human societies. It is a way that we like show a lot of things. So if you get a community's jokes, if you get the in jokes just out of hand, you spent enough time to like get a pretty good sense of like the upper level access of that community. It is not I'm not saying any means that you're like, you can just check it off and be done. Right. That's a really good sort of cue for you to know like, okay, I think I've like got the sense of them online. And now that also gives you a really good basis to now go talk to elders, like, especially if you're talking indigenous cultures. Like, you have to remember in indigenous culture specifically, the elders were murdered for practicing talking about their spiritualities, their religions, the way that they think about the world. You have to go to them and you have to basically prove like they're not wasting their time by talking to you. Right. So go do this anyways, even if you have money, like go forearmed. And a lot of people, if you're just like genuinely want to learn and you go in without that ego, and like the first time you mess up, someone goes, hey, you just like said something really racist, and instead of going, oh, but I didn't mean to, you go, oh, I'm so sorry, do you mind like telling me, if not what I did wrong, where I can like start looking to figure out what I did wrong? That ethos goes a long way for people. Like you will find somebody who is willing to talk to you, because a lot of people are desperate to talk about it.
Yes.
Well, I agree. I agree with everything that's being said. And specifically though, like Alex, what you were just saying about, you know, going into the communities and then using examples of elders and stuff. I think that's basic storytelling. Like, you know, that's basic writing, you know. So if you're writing about a community that's not your own, then you do that kind of research and you go find those people, and you're already stepping into their community to find out who they are and where they're from and what you know, that I think that's character development that people need to be doing. Specifically though, to the question about not having funds to pay for a sensitivity reader or a cultural consultant, I think if you reach out, you know, and you may have to ask quite a few people, you know, but if you reach out, you may find somebody that could, you know, lower their rates or come up with a different way to, like you said, like on the back end. I myself, I've had clients who've contacted me and asked me what my rates are, and I will, you know, send my rates to them. And then sometimes they just go away. So my assumption is that, you know, it's probably too much for them, or it's not in their budget or whatever. I've had a few people say, you know what, I really, really need you, and I really need this work, and I know I do, and I'm struggling with this and this. And they get really honest and transparent, you know, about what they recognize as their own issue and what they want to do. And be honest with, you know, this is where I'm from and I don't have much money and there's this and that, you know. I have never turned those clients down. You know, we work something out, you know, and then I feel like there's kind of this grand balance that happens, because then, you know, I'm on retainer for larger places, and sometimes the work that I'm putting in, you know, I don't want to talk myself out of a job, you know, but you know, there's a grand balance there where it's just like, okay, you know, there's high end people and high end rates. And then there are the people who are really actually struggling. And it's like, okay, you know, my belief that the end of way is that you give us something, you know, you always give something, you know, so then it's like, you know, do so many blasts of my website, you know, tell so many people or something, or, you know, it's $20 now and it's $20 next month, you know, kind of, it's, you know, it's like, I get it. You know, I've been poor. I've been a poor artist too. I know how difficult that is, you know, so I think you just keep asking. You go and you ask, and
Yeah.
you're very honest and you're very humble,
Mm-hmm.
very humble about what you're trying to do, and you will find the people who will help you.
Yep.
I also have tiered rates. I have like the studio quote, and then I have the poor starving artist who's been a assistant for 10 years.
Right.
Because
Totally.
been there, did it. Like,
Yeah.
I got y'all.
It's a range. It's a range.
Yep.
We'll do one last question before we wrap up. Mia asks, are there any books on sensitivity reading / cultural consulting that you recommend we read? Stacey, I know you're developing curriculum around this, so if you want to start, or anyone else has any thoughts.
Yes, I am developing curriculum around this with Brickhouse Talent, where we are creating the role of a cultural inclusivity coordinator for on-set. And
Awesome.
And what we're finding right now, after doing a lot of research and stuff, is that there's a different doorway we're going to get in to do this, and the whole goal of doing it, though, was because there's just been so many cases, and we know so many people, have been on set, actors who have had microaggressions that, all the time, and or they have to do what, I'm sure, you're going to get this from being an intimacy coordinator too. There's like 7 takes where they have to be, treated violently, or, derogatory terms are being shouted at them, and they have to do them over and over and over. And then they're traumatized, and it's intergenerational, it's cellular, and it's like, well, I'm just trying to do my art, and now I'm getting all messed up on set, so that's why we've looking at creating this particular position. And we'll be offering workshops coming up, and once I get back to LA in December, then we're really going to be able to do more things in person. The resources, though, I have not found a book that is just about like, this is cultural consulting or this is sensitivity reading. I've done a lot of research online to find out what other sensitivity readers do, and diversity editing and stuff. I've done a lot of research on that, and then specifically for the curriculum development, I read quite a few, like those standard books that are like have been out for the last couple of years. About so you want to talk about race, white fragility, and I'm sorry, I did not come prepared with a list of who those authors are, but you will find online places where all of those resources are listed, because there's a lot of people who are writing books, who are exploring this, trying to figure out what they can do. I would be careful, because some of this stuff lands, and some of it is like, that's not helpful. So I wouldn't just read one book and be like, okay, got it. I would do the research too,
Yeah. And like, oh, sorry, I was going to say, like how Alex mentioned, like I seek out authors who write about their lived experiences. So one book I was reading recently, Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong, and she's a poet and writer. And I'm more of a comedy TV writer person, but she had an essay that talked about like writing, like how to approach writing from other people's lived experiences, and how she is one type of Asian, and how it's different than encompassing all of Asian people's experiences. So I would seek out books that people are kind of talking about their identities in creative ways, even if it's not necessarily entertainment writing, but it's you're getting an insight into how they feel when they see people stereotyped on screen.
And there's also there's curriculum that the community has created, so to speak, organically. When I say curriculum, kind of in quotation marks. So, for example, the curriculum that came out of, sort of grassroots curriculum that came out of, say, the publication of a book like American Dirt. That spawned a group called Dignidad Literaria, dignity in literature, a Latinx response to it. Created by writers, for writers, but for the general public and journalists. There was some journalists in that group. And if you follow their advocacy, their strategy, and what occurred online in terms of the dialogue, and it's still there. That footprint is, still exists.
Yeah.
If you Google the name of the group, or if you Google the book, or you Google the authors, and so that's another sort of lived curriculum, so to speak, in terms of the teachable moments that came out of that occurrence. And it exists. It seems to me that those types of responses in terms of sort of creating standards, or the community saying, these are the standards that we expect.
Yes.
This is why we're upset. This is what you need to know. This is how you can acquire knowledge. And hey, come and talk to us, and we can help you. So that's another way to do some research. But I really agree that I think it's going to be helpful if there's some sort of, I don't want to say standardization, but some sort of effort to create curriculum, because it's the task of being a cultural consultant or a sensitivity reader is very, very complicated. I mean, you're dealing with very complicated issues, and oftentimes working with folks who don't know what they don't know.
Right. And no two projects are ever the same.
That's exactly right.
Exactly. So, so I can't say, well, yeah, I can't, there's no formula to it.
No one size fits all.
With art. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so, this is why if you have a story about X community, but you cast it with X community, but it's okay because there's kind of sort of from that community, but maybe not. I mean, that happens
so often.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. No. Right. Just that it will be so helpful for this type of curriculum, or guardrails or guidelines, how to, I think it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I call this work, it's the intersection of getting a PhD while going to therapy and trying not to traumatize yourself and others while you do it. And it's very hard. Yeah. I teach a class at UCLA that is producing 101, but I start teaching my students, here's the racist history of the industry that we work in. Let me explain to you what the Hays Code is still affecting us. We have Westerns as a genre entirely because of the Hays Codes. Right. It's you have to understand that this goes so much beyond just being able to read a book about writing itself. The very foundations of the industry are fundamentally flawed, and we have to look even deeper. You're not just going to fix it for the writing. Yeah. When you're talking about writing, though, my recommendation is you have to sort of train yourself how to think about story. It's never a neutral process. It's never just a TV show. It's never just a story. Right. Every person writing a story has a point of view and a reason for telling you that story. And so I would recommend starting and reading stuff like one of the first books where it really took a critical look at television was actually about the Simpsons. And the argument that book makes, it's a collection of a whole bunch of essays, but the argument it makes is people started talking about the Simpsons like it was counterculture and so edgy, and it's nope, the Simpsons is actually very, very, very culture, and it is very invested in keeping specific aspects of the culture, and it deconstructs it in that way. The Tao of Buffy does that as well. We now have a whole bunch of books that look very through a critical lens at stuff like Firefly and deconstruct them. And your goal should be I can walk in and do that to just about anything within I'll just watch it and then I'll turn around and be hey guys, let's talk about how this movie was about the phallocentric nature of our universe. And people will be it was a 30-minute whatever. I'm yes, it was.
And it was also.
Yeah, and it was also all about this. I will never forget the expressions. I was watching King Kong with three Marines, my friend and two others. And in that King Kong, which is the 2000s King Kong, there's a earthworm that comes out of the ground all wiggly with these giant, just terrifying teeth, and it eats this guy as he's trying to run away. And I was just watching it with those guys, and I go, man, what an eloquent statement about the phallocentric nature of our world right now. And out of the corner of my eye, I just saw all three of them go and stare at me, and I was yep, and now you're never going to think about this and not think about this ever again.
Yeah.
You just have to like train yourself to look critically at the stories around you and find the people like who are doing that from very specific point of views. Look at like the Indigenous point of view of something and then compare it to what Black people are saying about it, and then compare it what a Black Indigenous person is saying about it, because you have to acknowledge the intersection of all those different points of view. And like a Black person who's Indigenous, who's disabled, different viewpoint. Who are you centralizing? Like, I always get kind of snottily asked from some people, well, okay, I can't please all people. And my answer is always, I'm not asking you to please all people. I'm asking you to identify the most vulnerable person and protect them in your storytelling. That's my bar. And it's very hard to say boo to that.
That's great.
That's an incredible line to end on. Thank you again so much to our wonderful panelists, Marcela, Alex, and Stacey, for their time today and their dedication to the crucial work they're doing. This has been so insightful. I really hope everyone got a lot of takeaways from this. Danny will drop their social handles and links in the chat so you can check out more of their work. Thanks to our partners in the Cut Film Shop, LMU, and the Gotham. And thank you to our wonderful audience for watching and engaging at home for this discussion, and Julie on tech and Danny in the chat. And as a reminder, this was part of our Ethical Set series. You can catch the next one in October on disability representation on and off screen. And you can check out more of these events at seedandspark.com/events. And also bonus, we'll be sharing our Ethical Set series toolkit. So, you know, the conversation we had today and any resources will be linked in that blog post. We have inclusion riders in there. We have ways to have sustainable sets. There's no excuse. The resources are there. So I hope everyone applies the advice shared today to make their stories and productions more inclusive and respectful. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Okay, great.
Bye.
Bye.